Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Advice Line Live event. We are delighted to welcome Hannah Gray, who is the Advice and Information Officer, and Kat Thompson, who's the Communications and Engagement Manager for Enquire Line. So welcome to you both. Thank you so much at lunchtime. And apologies to those joining us this afternoon for a slight delay in us coming live. And a few technical hitches in the background there, so thank you for bearing with us while we join. So as I say, welcome guys, thank you so much for joining us. So for those people who are maybe not familiar with the work of the Enquire Helpline, Kat, I wonder if you want to just sort of give us an overview of the work that you do.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jan. Thanks for involving us in this. So Enquire is the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning. We're funded by the Scottish Government. We're managed by Children in Scotland. And our aim really is to raise awareness of and provide advice and information about additional support for learning in Scotland. And we do that. We have a helpline. We also have a website which has loads and loads of information about additional support for learning, parents' rights, children's rights, and the duties that are on education staff. We also produce a parent's guide to additional support for learning, and what that does is it really takes all of the legislation and guidance around additional support for learning and puts that into an easy to read sort of booklet for families to help them understand it. We get about 1,500 inquiries a year to our helpline, and just to sort of put that into context, about 90% of those are from parents and carers, and quite a significant number of those calls and inquiries are about children with autism, so about 50% are about that. We tend to hear quite a lot about probably very similar issues that Scottish Autism hear about, so it tends to be around children missing school, looking at the support that they feel their children need in school and what they can do about getting that in place, school placement and placing requests, and also a lot of issues for us around communications and relationships with schools. So that's our sort of bread and butter. So I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about that today. And we're also part of an organisation called My Rights, My Say, which is aims really to make sure that children's voices are heard in decisions about their support. So they help children aged 12 to 15 with additional support needs to have a say when decisions are being made about their support. We also have a website called Reach for children and young people, and actually trying to sort of remove the stigma around additional support for learning and give them advice about the ways that they can get help in school. So that's sort of in a nutshell.
So an awful lot of stuff.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, as you say, we have a similar, through our advice line, we have similar numbers of parents calling us, and indeed young people themselves starting to engage with us through our live chat function on our website to tell us about their experiences of school. But I think one of the bits that really resonated with me that you spoke about there is about rights and understanding, you know, when your child or young person is at school, what are your rights as their parent or carer, and indeed children themselves understanding what their rights are when they're at school. And I know, Hannah, that's some work that you've been doing. You're actually on the phone line through Enquire and, you know, talking about that sort of issue with parents.
Yeah, definitely, Joanna. So, you know, rights comes up so often for us, and it's kind of the key, especially at the moment, what we're talking about. And I think we were just talking earlier about how important it is that everyone's aware that with the Additional Support for Learning Act, which is the law that covers anyone who's struggling at school, that your child still has rights, and you as a young person still have a right to an education and to support, even during the pandemic. That hasn't changed. So, you know, at most basic, your local authority or your child's local authority where you live, they have a duty to identify any child who's struggling at school, to offer them support that meets their needs, so that they can get the most from their education. And that hasn't changed at the moment. And I think that's one of the key things that it's always quite helpful to know most simply, is that if your child is struggling at school or struggling to get to school, they have a right to support, and that support isn't based on diagnosis. So if you're struggling, you have a right to support. So I know maybe some of your families are waiting on assessments and things. It's important to be aware you still have a child still has a right to support based on their individual needs, whether or not they have a diagnosis. And everyone, that's parents and young people, have a right to have their voices heard. So when the school are working with you to work out if things aren't going so well at the moment, they have a duty to listen to your voice, but also your child's voice. So when we're talking about my rights, my say, that's also additional support for young people aged 12 to 15 to make sure their voices are heard, ask for assessments. So there are really, this is the Additional Support for Learning Act is really about young people's rights and about parents' rights to make sure that they're all involved in that conversation about education.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we certainly speak to a lot of families who, particularly at the moment, whose children maybe are finding that transition back to school difficult. Schools and teachers have done an awful lot of work, and it's important that we recognise that teachers do to support children in what's been an incredibly testing time for everybody. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. But so when we're talking about children, regardless of whether they have a diagnosis of a condition, have access to education, have access to conversations and planning around them attending school, what's the best way, in your experience, for parents to start that dialogue with the school? Particularly I'm thinking for those parents whose children may be having that transition from nursery into P1, and again from sort of P7 into secondary school. These are massive transitions for the child. So what's the best way to start that conversation, to ask for that help for parents?
Yeah. Or do you want to say that? I wasn't sure. I mean, in terms of the helpline.
Just to go back to the first point before you answer specifically, Hannah, was around, I think it is helpful to understand the rights that you have before you go in, and to understand that you have the right to, you have a place around the table, and you have the right to ask questions, and just feel confident in raising concerns if you have any with the school. I mean, Hannah will go into sort of more specific information, but I think a lot of it actually is confidence sometimes in just, should I go in, should I raise this? I've raised it before, do I need to raise it again? And I think it is just sometimes with some of the leaflets and things that we've got, it'll just give you that sort of confidence to know that it's okay to do that. I think can be quite helpful.
And I think as well, for as you sort of a bit, Dave, that you said resonated with me in terms of some of the stories that we've heard through the advice line, is some parents feel like they are constantly going into school or constantly raising similar issues, and as you say, it's around confidence. And so our team here that we have from Enquire have put together a document with some resources, with some links to information for parents, which our brand team, our comms team, will put up for parents at the end of this session, because I think that it's knowledge is power, isn't it? It's like when you have the information, you have the knowledge, then you're able to then sort of, as you say, go in with a bit more confidence you're asking for. But Hannah, you wanted to
yeah, no, I think just kind of building on what Kat was saying, I think it is, one of the key things, we do get quite a lot of parents who just kind of phone us before a meeting to have that conversation about how, what's the best way to ask for things, and to kind of clarify what you want to know and why you want to know before you get to that meeting. One of the things we talk about, and I think it maybe comes back down to what you were saying, Joanna, where families are feeling you're going again and again and having the same conversation, is talking about having kind of a clear written plan of some sort with the school, with the teachers, and really that being about, going in and starting off conversations with, well, what do we all understand my child's needs are, or what's my child's view of what their needs are, and what kind of bringing the support in from that side. So what do we have a joint understanding of what everyone and what the needs are in this situation and the strengths? How are we going to provide that support, and agreeing a kind of communication, what's the outcomes of support, and how's that based on the individual child and your child, and how you're going to keep up to date with that when things, it's all very well having a set, once a term we meet, but also how are you going to communicate when things aren't going well? And you know, just knowing you have the right to ask for that and to ask for a meeting and ask for a plan and saying, how can we make this work? And how can we work together with that? I think, what we always hope is that you can start off by working with the school, and if you can get that in, but sometimes having something more written and something, you have to hold to. And a lot of parents also like to bring our parents' guide along and put that, have their notes, whether that's at a virtual meeting at the moment, so that you feel you have that power and those words to kind of bring to that conversation. But mostly it's about the confidence to ask and explain where you're coming from as a parent, because spent the last 6 months with our children in lockdown, so a lot and have a lot of data to, a lot to learn and a lot of knowledge to bring to the school.
I think as well, there's some nice information on our website actually about how to get the most out of meetings, and I suppose some of the advice that's in that is things like, sort of think about what are the issues that you want to talk about when you go into those meetings. Like, what are the things, because often there's a be an agenda, it's about looking at the plan, but are there other issues that you really want to make sure that you talk about before you we often say to parents that, if email to them to the school beforehand, say really looking forward to the meeting next week, here's a couple of issues that I'd quite like to make sure that we have time to discuss. And again, it just makes sure that they're not falling off the end of a meeting that's all about what's going on in, specifically with schools. So there's other advice about things to do and things to think about before you go in. And we all, it's very difficult now with the online meetings, but as well, parents have a right to take a supporter to meetings as well. And so again, they can become quite overwhelming, these meetings, if you're talking about how your child's getting on. Just having somebody along that can take the notes and you don't need to worry about all of that. It can be really helpful as well, and it just gives you a chance. It's quite difficult to contain all the information when lots of people are talking, and also, again, we often say, like, feel able to ask if you don't understand something or something's been discussed that you didn't know was happening with it. It's again, feel confident to ask, can you just explain what that actually means to my child? And language like that can be really helpful. So again, things like that on our website if people are sort of to have a look at that and feel a bit more prepared.
Yeah, and I think that probably is, and it's been quite a sort of common theme throughout some of these events that we've had around people having the opportunity to prepare themselves and have that time and space to plan. And like you say, Hannah, many parents have been homeschooling during, over the last 6 months, so have probably had an insight into their child's learning style and what's a best way to approach learning for that child. And parents know their children best, that they are the people that know their children best, and so they now come with so much more insight and so much more understanding of their child. It's about creating those safe spaces for that collaboration to happen between the school and between the home, so that that child is getting the best out of their education that they possibly can. So one of the and we've got lots and lots of people joining us this afternoon, indeed even somebody from the Philippines. So I find it's evening time over there, so good evening to you in the Philippines. And do feel free to sort of ask us questions, we can, as we're going along today, do feel free, or any comments that you have about your own child's experience of education, if there's things that you think actually, there aren't resources out there to help me with this particular issue that I'm facing with my child, let us know. And we're really open to collaborating together. This is the start of the conversation in terms of how do we make sure we're getting support and resources out to people when they need them. But one of the sort of key I would say issues that parents phone us about is about that transition into school, and being supported with that transition. There's stress, there's anxiety, all sort of mixed up in there as well. Parents perhaps feeling under pressure to get their child to the school gate for 9 a.m, particularly now where the structure of the school day is slightly different, where some schools are sort of saying, 9:30 sort of the limit before, and then the doors close kind of thing. And I was speaking to one parent who had said, it takes her a couple of hours to support the transition of her daughter into school. So she misses morning registration, is able to stay for an hour, and then misses the afternoon registration and is marked down as not attended. But actually it's taken them all that time to get that child into school. What advice do you guys have for parents, about that transition into school? What can they expect from the school in terms of support around that?
I suppose a lot of it's about that flexibility and the hearing that, it's about the individual child in this. Like, obviously there will be key things the school, their standard practice that 9:30 the door is closed, but it's that there is an individual child at the beginning, at the start of this, and that there is a duty around that. And it might, even if they have other children who are perfectly able to kind of manage that transition, it's a really recognised thing that young people are struggling with that transition at the moment. So, it's about kind of speaking to the school creative, about what solutions are working at home and what they're seeing at school. And I suppose joining that up in a sense. And, it sounds like in those sorts of situations, the parents are doing what they know how to do, but actually it should be a joint conversation with the school to kind of look at that flexibility. Is there, what are the barriers that they're experiencing that's making that so challenging? And if it is that they cannot be in school for full time or for those amount of hours, what other education is being offered to them? What needs to be looked at if they are only getting a few hours of school in the day? Don't know I know there's a really good infographic that we've been working on with Nate, and I think it covers some of this as well, Kat.
Yeah, so we just produced that. So that was something that we put together with the National Autism Implementation Team, and it's advice about anxiety related absence. So I suppose that's about children who maybe were attending school and now are finding it quite difficult to go back. And there's 11 sort of broad pieces of advice about things that might help that, and it very much is about talking to the school, but it's also talking about looking at what do you know as a parent has helped your child. So if there's things that will help them keep calm or self-regulate, share that with the school. It's about looking at how can the school make the day as predictable as possible, for example. So is there things that they can be looking at? Is there things that they could be putting in place? So if there are going to be changes to the way that school day is going to look like, how do they make sure that child's prepared for that? How do they make sure that there's a plan B if it doesn't all go to plan? And again, I think that does come down to looking at the plans and looking at understanding what's this child's needs, what are the needs going to be now, maybe that were different from before, and how do we adapt, and how do we try to make the support that we know this child will need, how do we make that happen now with everything that's going on? And I think it is, as Hannah said, trying to find those really creative ways around things. I think you'd mentioned, Joanna, there have been some instances where there was about a child not being able to understand that they couldn't go somewhere for lunch where they'd previously gone for that. Probably a blanket rule across the school, but is there a way that child could have lunch if it's not going to be in the hall, but maybe it's outside? And how do you help him or her understand that change that's going with that? So I think as well, there's also, I think in the NATE information that we were given, they were saying about there is going to be ups and downs, and sometimes it is actually trying things for a period of time. It's maybe not going to work the first day, but it's about having that open communication, so when things don't go right, there is a route into saying, right, well, we've tried that, but maybe we need to keep going with that, or maybe that one really was a no, that's not going to work, and trying to have that sort of ongoing dialogue. And I suppose always moving on from things, and if something hasn't worked, sort of leaving that in the day that didn't work, and actually right, new day, what do we do? And that can be very, very difficult. And as you said at the beginning, it's not, there's a lot of staff out there trying to do this in very difficult situations, but I suppose it's not just assuming that something can't find support to put in place, but I do know that it is challenging. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's all sorts of differences into how the school day is functioning at the moment. Teachers have done an absolute power of work to get schools ready and open again for the beginning of the term, but obviously things have had to look slightly for a lot of schools in terms of you know, some of the restrictions that may be on place in terms of children bubbling and all that sort of thing. But, you know, we have, you know, spoken to parents whose children who have maybe used certain spaces within the school, you know, when things maybe have got a little bit tough in the classroom, they've had a safe space where they can go and receive, you know, support or either, you know, just, you know, sort of spend some time for themselves, just, you know, removing some of that stress and distress that's happening. But we've been hearing from some families that those spaces are now no longer available because they're being utilised for other things. So I suppose it's about the box now, isn't it? It's about, as you see, not being afraid to put something on the table and say, well, what about this? And, you know, everybody around that child has all got different insight and all got, you know, different things to bring to the table. Parents, you know your children, you've got all that knowledge, information. Teachers, you know, use all that information that parent has, but likewise, a lot of knowledge about the child in that school environment that maybe parents don't have. So it's collaborating, isn't it? It's joining it together and starting to, and asking that child as well, you know, can't do this now, but so what would you like to do? What could we try to do? What do you think might happen here?
I think there's an important thing, Joanna, about there, even, you know, it's like, even though the environment might have changed, the need hasn't changed. So I suppose it's working the fact that actually, if you look at what the young person is struggling with or what the function of that separate space was, it might be that there's another way of finding that support in a different way, even if it looks differently. And the law is quite clear. It's not kind of prescriptive that, you know, a child has a right to a specific thing, but that means that also they have a right for their needs to be supported. So if they have that need, it's about, you know, everyone kind of working together and having that conversation. Is there another way? And it is important that, you know, schools have obviously done an amazing job in planning and looking at things, but it might be that things like risk assessments maybe need to be reviewed. You know, young people can adapt so amazingly to things that it might be that what they thought that needed to be assessed as a risk isn't a risk, and that, you know, there might be another direction they can go in, and also that it needs to look at the individual child. So there needs to be reasonable adjustment. So if there is a blanket policy, it's not that your child has lost the right to get support with that need. It's just that it might look a bit different. And sometimes I think schools, and it's been such a busy time for everyone, that some decisions have been made quickly that might need to be looked again at to see, is there another adjustment we could make, because this fits most, but not this young person.
And obviously we'll have quite a lot of parents and carers watching today, but we'll also have young people themselves watching today. And we've spoken quite a lot around sort of rights and support for parents and carers. And very briefly at the top there touched on the My Rights, My Say. So what I suppose advice and support we have for children and young people themselves in terms of them advocating their rights and understanding their rights within the school environment.
So My Rights, My Say, if a child is aged between 12 to 15 and has additional support needs, they do have sort of additional rights to be involved in decisions, and the My Rights, My Say can provide advocacy for children to do that. And certainly I think it's about them obviously understanding that they have the right to be involved in discussions and decisions about you know, about their support when they are being made. But I suppose in a way it's thinking about the different ways that you're asking children what they think. And I know for some children with autism it may be difficult for them to give their views, but I suppose it's you know, thinking about the way that you're actually doing that. If it is somebody that's just saying, is this working for you, you're likely to get a yes answer for that. So it's like, how can you actually unpick and find ways that would work with that child. I was chatting to somebody who uses talking mats, for example, about, you know, having different spaces and, you know, they sort of ask questions around the different spaces. So I mean, this is something that we in Enquire don't provide advice about the options and the different strategies, but I suppose it's about using people like yourself and Scottish Autism around some of the ways that could be done, and really trying to make sure that their sort of voices are at the heart of that. We have a And again, My Rights My Say quite similar to Enquire in that quite a big percentage of the children they support have autism. And again, they're very skilled in working with children to help them. And it's not always to speak on their behalf. It's actually giving them the confidence and helping them find ways to share their views. A couple of examples are things like children that were not expected to go back to school in 5th or 6th year, for example, where we have a case sort of scenario on the website where a child was said that wouldn't come back to school in 5th and 6th years, and it was actually using the advocacy service that then helped that child speak to the school about what hadn't been working, why they weren't able to come into school the previous year as much as they wanted to, and trying to look again at the solutions for what might help. And I think having that support from another agency can actually be really helpful if families and schools have been having these discussions for some time. It's sort of putting the child's voice at the centre of that. So I think it's really useful. And again, our website has got information about the My Rights My Say service, and they have a website themselves, which I don't think I included in the pack, which I should have done. So I'll send that over.
Great, and we can add that here. We've got a couple of comments and questions here that have come in from people. So the first one here is from Rachel, and she says, my son has had her son has 4 different teachers working with him in a week, one of which he has a really strong relationship with, and he feels very safe with her. So he finds that he's struggling when he's maybe not working alongside that teacher. And the mum has been told that she feels that the teacher feels that the young boy is relying on her too much for support. And at the same time, the school though haven't really sort of given a plan as to what they're going to do to support her child with this. So she's asking, where does she stand with that? You know, what would be the best way of sort of trying to unpick some of that?
Yeah, so I suppose there's kind of a few things. That sounds like a really frustrating situation for that mum. She's trying to kind of explain her concerns, and obviously the way the young person's vocalizing quite clearly what he's struggling with as well. You know, you kind of touched on it in one sense. I think one of the main things would be also, I think, probably asking for a meeting with the school and having that conversation about what is the plan. You know, if the idea is that they feel that he is relying too much on someone, what's the kind of beginnings, you know, what's the actual support that's going to provide him to be able to interact with other adults? You know, what's the evidence behind the change in support or the, you know, this support structure they're putting in place? How is it kind of related to the individual child or young person? So I think probably in most cases, we probably start with saying, you know, asking for a meeting, asking, you know, what we understanding his needs are, and how are we supporting him with this, and what's the kind of if these, you know, they've made it quite explicit, they feel it's because there's this issue around reliance, but how's he going to be supported through that? Yeah. And how's that still going to meet his needs would be kind of the big things that I would initially be thinking of. I don't know if you have a
yeah, just I suppose that we've had quite a lot of calls around this issues over the years, and I think sometimes it's also like, is there something about the person that he you know, it's about learning why is that particular teacher that he's responding to and feels really happy with. So is there anything that person does that could be, you know, sort of thought about, looked at, and just as Anna said, put in the plan in terms of consistently the days will feel more the same if you know, if there's certain things that really work for them in sharing practice. And again, that's not really where Enquire's information is, but again, just from over the years and hearing a lot of things that we've heard, that sometimes that is just the key. It's looking at the are working and saying, how do we replicate that over the day, and making sure, I suppose, that the staff that are working with them are aware of that anything that might not seem huge would actually make quite a big difference if it was the same as on a Monday or whatever day it is that you've got them out. So again, that can, I think things like that can be in the plan and it can be discussed, and also I think the good idea about sometimes the plan is a piece of paper, but it also gives you an opportunity to look back and say, you know, the last time we met, we these were the things that we sort of highlighted as needing to happen. Have they happened? Are they working? If they're not working, what else will we do? Just keeping that dialogue going, I suppose, so it doesn't fall off the end of a meeting or something like that.
And I suppose as well, recognising the importance of relationships in this.
Absolutely.
You know, it's relationships and understanding are the core of everything, really, aren't they? You see, he obviously feels very safe with that teacher, and they've obviously got a great relationship. Maybe it is about sort of learning.
Yeah, I mean, a good example of that, I think, is we've had calls over the years, and it was maybe about where a child was sitting, for example, in a classroom. So one teacher, he was happier at the back, but on the second half of the week when he had a different teacher, the teacher wanted them at the front, and it didn't work. And again, it didn't seem like a massive issue, but it actually was for that child. And so Thursdays and Fridays when he had to sit at the front weren't very good days. And that's such a simple. It doesn't cost any money, and it doesn't take any time, but it does make a difference to that child's experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I hope that's gone some way to answering your question there, Rachel. And we have another question here from Andy. Hi, Andy, lovely to see you. So Andy's asking, our son, who's 10, has been struggling to get back to school. And he has so far managed 2 days a week, which, thinking about it, is certainly better than no days a week and not going to school at all. But as the weeks are going on, they're just sort of wondering how will the school look after his education, and they've been very Andy's saying here, they've been very understanding so far, which has been great. You know, obviously very supportive school of this little boy, but obviously the uncertainty and the sort of, I suppose, the sort of missed education is causing worry and concern. So what can Andy and his family sort of do in terms of supporting that?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, the kind of the key thing there, you know, for, you know, it sounds, Andy, that at the moment the part-time timetable, as we would call it, you know, is kind of meeting that young person's needs. But, you know, if it's a sign, you know, it shouldn't be a long-term solution to, you know, his support needs if that he's on part-time. So I suppose there's something about having that conversation and, you know, that clarity with the school. What's the long-term plan with him? You know, for some young people, it will be that building up their education is the best way of doing this, but it shouldn't be that for the long term he's on those 2 days a week. And if he is, and that's the right way, it's about a child doesn't just need to be in school to be entitled to additional support. If a young person isn't able to attend, they still have a right to an education. So there's something about that conversation about, well, what learning's going on in school, and to support him to build up back into school more long term, but also what learning's happening on the other 3 days of the week and what's the right support with that. So there's something maybe about having a conversation about the kind of long-term plan again, I say, with the school. And if they don't, you know, in a way, it's something that might be, we would be directing to yourselves or things for kind of the specific strategies for that young person, or asking the school don't know what the solutions are, where are they kind of looking further for advice and for answers, and there being kind of something clear for all the family about, this is the milestones we're aiming for, this is what we're going to do if it does continue how it is. Have you got anything to add, Kat, I suppose, in that?
Yeah, I think as well, if parents feel that they have been having those communications, and, you know, up to a point often they are very positive but nothing's changing, you know, that there are additional support for learning officers at the local authority that again parents can talk to. I mean, we'd always say work with the school wherever you can, but sometimes if things aren't changing and they're not shifting, that is an option. And again, the Enquire Help website has the named contact in each local authority if people feel that is an option, that they want to sort of take that a wee bit further than the school. There's also, and I'm not sure if people will be familiar with this, there's something called mediation, which is an independent sort of services across Scotland. There's two main ones that sort of, if parents feel that things have got to a sticking point and things are not moving on and they're having the same conversations, independent mediation can be quite helpful. And basically what it is it's bringing people around the table in an independent space to be able to discuss possible solutions. And it can be something, it doesn't need to have got to a very big disagreement stage. It can just be that things haven't moved on and things aren't actually changing. So again, it can be useful exercise sometimes brings different people around the table to have those discussions about what the options are. But I mean, I think for what Hannah says, absolutely right. It's about the you know, looking at what the longer term options are, and how you maybe stage you know, build that up over a period of time. And I suppose within local authorities, there's often a lot of experience within special schools, within other schools that have children with autism, and looking at where yeah, as Hannah said, where can we, you know, if what we're doing isn't working, where can we find support to make that happen? So.
Yeah.
And I think what you said, Kat, there about it's really, yeah, you can always go back to the school, but you know, if things are going on, sometimes it's that other person, some quality improvement officer, the additional support for learning department, or something like mediation. If things have got really stuck, there are other options for parents. It's not, you know, it's not the end, and you can always phone us and have a chat about it and sort of talk about where you are as well.
Yeah. And that was sort of what I was going to add in there. You know, sometimes it is difficult to find the people that you need to get to the table, but certainly I think from our advice line and from your information line, you know, we can help you seek out that information. We can help you find the right people to put around the table. But it sounds like from discussions today that the main theme of this is let's talk, let's have the conversations. It might be difficult to do sometimes because we are, you know, going at 100 miles an hour sometimes, but actually, you know, taking the time to have that conversation and to keep that child right at the centre.
And I go back just again on that last issue about the advice that we've shared recently around in terms of that building up. It may be something that doesn't work straight away. You know, if you want to get that to 2.5 days, that may not be in the first week, that may actually be longer term sort of, and it may be that we have, you know, schools and families have to stick at it for a longer and then review it, rather than it being like, well, that didn't work this week, so we're back to 2 days. It's agreeing those sort of milestones and timescales can be quite, or at least discussing them can be quite helpful, because actually if within a month period they make it in 2.5 days, you know, every few weeks, that's actually that's success. So I suppose it's about agreeing that and what the target is as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We just have one final comment here from Gina, and she's saying, you know, and again we hear about this a lot, that transition from where you're maybe in a classroom with a teacher who delivers all your lessons to then going to high school. She says her 12-year-old has just started an academy school, and it has a completely new environment of several teachers who are now involved in that child's education, and you know, it's a whole other world to learn about. I know you guys are very familiar with that as well. We've just had one final comment here just to sort of wrap us up this afternoon from Shell, and she's saying that I just feel like there's nothing in place for my child. I get no feedback on classwork. There's no news of an IEP being put in place for her child. She feels that her son's being left behind, and whilst they were engaging some of the online learning during lockdown, that's when, and we spoke about this earlier on, around how she realised what skills her son had in reading and writing, and she was able to understand where his education was at. Just as a final kind of piece, because I think that probably will, and I can already see people liking Shelley's comment here, will be a thing that resonates with a lot of parents. So what could Shell's first steps be in trying to deal with some of this?
One of the things we talked about earlier was about the communication with schools. We talked a lot about that. And one of the things we often see on the helpline is about, you know, keeping a note of any communications with and any requests for specific things to put it in writing. Often things are done at meetings, and we hear from families sometimes that they don't get copies of minutes or they don't have it in writing. So even if you've had a productive meeting, or, you know, you've had a planning meeting or whatever, an email to the school to say, you know, that was a good meeting, just to clarify, or just to say that, you know, I've made a specific request for an IEP, you know, so that you've got that document. And if nothing's happening and they're not responding, it's just a case of copying that email and saying, prior to my, I mean, not, you don't need to use this language, it's like, here's the note from the minute before where we discussed that we were going to open an IEP, and then nothing's happened in the preceding 6 weeks. So just wondering where we're at with that as a starting point. And then in a way, and again, it comes to confidence, it's really difficult sometimes to be brave enough to feel like you can do that. But we say to parents all the time on the helpline, you know, just, yeah, sometimes you just have to keep going, you just have to keep trying. But if you have anything that you're requesting in writing, it's a lot easier to say that was 6 weeks since that email went. So I think, again, there's so much going on with families that, you know, it's another thing to think about and to have to hand, but it can be really, really helpful. And it's doing it in a positive way as well. It's saying, I appreciate things are busy at the moment, but this is actually now quite an issue for us because I'm really concerned that my child isn't getting support.
Absolutely, because, you know, Shell's come back here saying, you know, she's super fed. So with hearing from the school that he's doing fine, but lockdown and her sort of stepping into that teacher role through that online learning has really demonstrated and showed her a different thing. So I think, you know, it's a common thing that we have, and it is about opening that dialogue up with the school. It is about, you know, sort of sitting down and saying, well, you know, I understand where you're coming from, but, you know, listen to where I'm coming from. And Shell, if it would be helpful, we've talked a lot around sort of confidence of going in and having those meetings. And you know, you're very welcome to contact the advice line and speak to one of our community advisors who's quite happy to sort of coach you in what you might see. We might not be able to give you the words to say, but we're quite happy to listen and, you know, and sort of coach you in what you might say, just to give you that space to prepare, you know, in advance what you might want to say, because sometimes it's nice to just sort of run it past somebody else who has a little bit of insight before you then go in to the big meeting, particularly if it is a situation that, you know, is maybe quite complex and difficult.
I think Hannah mentioned the parents guide. Oh, sorry, Hannah, on you go.
No, I was just gonna, it was actually the parents guide. So we have a fact sheet on it's called Avoiding and Solving Problems. And actually, I think sometimes if you are at the stage that kind of Michelle's at, where it feels like having the same conversation over and over again, that kind of sets things out in steps. And I think sometimes that's quite helpful to know, you know, in that space of knowing, well, I've written to the school and I've asked for this, and maybe even, as Kat's saying, as well as kind of following up an email, but putting a time frame on even in your head of saying, if the school don't get back to me by this date, and you can even say that to them in quite a soft way, you know, I'm maybe going to take another step, so that you're not sitting there waiting for an IEP and you have no date for it, but you know there are steps above that, and hopefully it doesn't come to that, but you do have those kind of next steps, and they're there for you if you need to take them. Often help as well, just to visualize that you're not just having the same phone call over and over again.
Absolutely.
And feel empowered to ask a question. So if you don't feel that the school, for example, may say they don't need an IEP, we feel, but suppose it's asking, well, how are you? You know, it doesn't always need to be the school telling parents things. It is, they can ask. So putting it on them to explain how the support is working or what support they're getting as well can sometimes just reframe a conversation that you feel like you've said the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And team in the background have just posted a link to the document that Hannah was referring to there. So if anybody is interested in looking at that, on there. So thank you so very, very much for joining us this afternoon from the Inquire helpline. I think it's been a super informative and a really, really great conversation that we've had today. And it certainly is the start of the conversation, I think, between our advice line and the Inquire line as well. And as I say, if there are things out there that we're not maybe looking at, or we're not supporting them, please do let us know. And we will post details of how to contact the community advisors through the advice line as well. So if any of our listeners this afternoon want to contact us, or indeed from the Enquire line, just talk through their specific circumstance and get advice and support, then details of how to do that will follow on today. So again, Hannah, Kat, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thank you. Bye.